record this. Okay, so we will record it and we'll stop the recording after the end of the presentation and the respondents' interventions. So we will not record the Q&A. So thank you for joining us. I'm Maria Mikalis. I am a reader in communication policy at the University of Westminster. And I will start by very briefly introducing the association and what we are going to do. And this is our first event. Okay, just. Okay. So IAPMR, the International Association of Public Media Researchers. The association was set up by Professor Lizzie Jackson and her team, and we are truly delighted to have her as our first speaker in our first webinar today. And this is the new leadership team. Myself and Alessandro Dharma are joint presidents. Mina Horowitz is the vice president. Mikael Bernarzita is the treasurer. Marta Rodriguez Castro is the secretary responsible also for communication. And you have probably received emails from Marta. And we would like to thank her very, very much for all her work in organizing this webinar today and publicizing it. Florence Hartman from EBU is the industry liaison officer. And finally, Gregory Farrell-Lowe, who many of you probably know, the RIPE chairperson. He's part of the team in an advisory capacity. The association, as you know, aims to promote the principles of public service media and promote strong and sustainable PSM in as many countries as possible. What we aim to do as the new leadership team is to try and grow the association and build a lively community around PSM, bringing together academic scholars and practitioners. We want to make it a digital-first networked association, and today's webinar is part of this idea. I'll show you in a minute what other webinars we have organized till the end of this calendar year. We also plan to produce and circulate a newsletter for members. The aim is to produce 3 newsletters per year to start with. We will continue to support the RIPE initiative, the conference, and the book, as you know. And we'll work with existing collaborations that the association has with the Public Service Media Alliance, the EBU, of course, and the Central European University, and explore new ones. And these are the webinars we have organized up until the end of the year. So today we have Professor Lizzie Jackson, and Alessandro will introduce today's webinar in a minute. Next week, on Thursday, we have the second webinar, and we have Professor Karen Donders. And towards the end of the month, we have Professor Christian Fuchs. So this is what we have planned for the rest of the year. And this is the registration QR code. So if you haven't registered for the forthcoming webinars and you are interested, you can scan this code and go to the registration page. And this is all from me. And I pass the mic to Alessandro. Thank you.
Yes, hi everyone. Warm welcome from me as well. So we are, as Maria was saying, we are delighted to have Lizzie, Professor Lizzie Jackson, as the first speaker of our new series of IAPMR at Dialogues webinars. The topic of the title of Lizzie Jackson topic presentation is Bricolage and Fluidity towards Post-Channel PSM. So I'm sure we will gain some very important insights into understanding media use by young people, which is currently a priority, a strategic priority for public service media organizations around the world. So just a few words about Lizzie and also our two respondents. So first, Lizzie. So Lizzie is not only a an academic expert in public service media. She's also a very experienced public service media practitioner. She started her media career at the BBC in 1982, and then she ran for several years her own radio production company before returning to the BBC in the late 1990s. And she was one of a small team who launched the BBC website in those years. She then became the BBC Online Communities producer in 1998. Overseeing the build and launch of all the BBC message boards, live chats, and chat rooms. Lizzie started her academic career at the University of Westminster in 2007. She was HRC Senior Research Fellow, working on a project on the BBC first virtual world for children, Adventure Rock. Then she moved on to Ravensbourne University, where she became Deputy Dean of the Broadcast Department. And then finally, she moved to London South Bank University in 2015. And Liz is currently Director of Research of the School of Arts and Creative Industries at the London South Bank University. She's done a lot of work on public service media, innovation, and young people. She's currently principal investigator of the HR3 network, a multi-million pounds project funded by the European Regional Development Fund. And Lizzie, she will tell us more about this project during her talk. So this is Lizzie. Again, we are delighted to have her with us today. And of course, Lizzie, I should mention, Maria already mentioned, she was the first president of the International Association of Public Media Researchers. So it's all too fitting that she's our first speaker in this new series of webinars. Our two respondents, and again, thank you very much for accepting our invitation to serve as respondent today. So the first of our two respondents is Madiana Asseraf-Jacob. Madiana is Head of Media Development and Young Audiences at the European Broadcasting Union, EBU, where she manages strategic programs to support public service media to be more relevant to all audiences, including, of course, young people. She produces research as part of her job and strategic recommendations, engage in knowledge exchange activities, and she was the lead author of the Youth Content What Works report, which was published by the EBU in 2020. And then finally, our second respondent, Professor Vilde Sundet. Vilde is a researcher at the Department of Media and Communication at the University of Oslo. She has published extensively in the area of media policy and media industry research in some of the leading journals in the field, including New Media and Society, Media Culture and Society, and the European Journal of Communication. Sundet is her most recent book is Television Drama in the Age of Streaming, which was published by Palgrave earlier this year in 2021. And perhaps most relevantly for today's webinar, Vilde is currently working as a principal investigator on the research project Global Natives, serving young audiences on global media platforms, a project funded by the Norwegian Research Council. Okay, so that's all from me. So I think I will leave it now the floor to Lizzie. Lizzie, that's over to you. I've got your PowerPoint presentation, so let me share it, and just let me know when I need to.
Thanks very much. I've had my laptop rebuilt and partially rebuilt, let's say, and can't share media at the moment, so apologies about that. Also, if you hear some drilling in the background, the Museum of London archaeologists are doing some drilling outside, so apologies for that. They're looking at a couple of Roman houses, villas. Anyway, so I'm going to be talking. Thank you very much, Alessandra, and to the new team, and I wish them well. You know, and this is tremendous that you know, we're not just IAPMR is not just filling in the gap between RIPE. It's you know, it's a string of pearls, and it's fantastic that we've got this opportunity to now to have a continuous stream of dialogue, whereas you know, previously at RIPE we waited, we had the book and then the conference, so this is terrific. I think it's wonderful. Welcome to everybody. So I'm going to be talking about bricolage and fluidity, and really about whether we're moving into a post-channel public service media, which is a provocative statement, which I hope will stimulate some discussion. So Alessandra, if you could move the slides on up, or slide on, thank you. So I've been looking at, when I was at the BBC, I worked in BBC R&D for many years. When we used to create a new service, we often used to test it or think about young people, or even build services which we said could be reskinned, repurposed for different audiences. And that's because obviously young people are often early adopters. So they give us a good weather eye on what's coming over the hill, what's in the medium term, and sometimes even long term, vis-a-vis new forms of media. So I've been working with the Youth Media and Culture Network, which is a group of scholars, more on that later, looking at young people's media, particularly in response to Claire Hudson, who is the editor of the BBC homepage, her request that we start to look at, or we investigate as researchers, young people's media use, particularly between the ages of 12 to 16. And I know from when I was at the BBC that there was a teens website, there was a SO website, you know, which was the next iteration of a teens website, but it was always very problematic creating media for teens, particularly 14 to 16-year-olds, because they are very particular people. They're multicultural, obviously, and have different settings, but they think in terms of media universes, not television and radio channels. So this is what the Youth Media and Culture Network is looking at. And we just got a grant from SHRC, the Canadian Social Sciences Research Council, to investigate that in Canada, the UK and Germany. So what they like from our preliminary investigations are aggregations of different types of media clustered around a central theme or purpose, what I suppose industry people would call a brand. And I think of such aggregations like the murmuration of birds. You know, when birds are about to fly off and go south for the winter, they form and reform, and around usually one central core purpose, which is to go south. So what we're dealing with now, and Mark Juice says, you know, that we're swimming in media, we're surrounded by media, and it's different kinds of media aggregating in different ways. I call it bricolage. Because bricolage has flux, you know, it harks back, it thinks, it has a lineage, most notably probably in the Fluxus movement of the sort of 50s, 60s and 70s, and even earlier, where different types of media are aggregated for a message or around a central purpose. And that's for the Fluxus movement is worth having a look at. They would use anything and everything, music, media, bits of art, lumps of objects, whatever. And also we know that in media, we have media environments now that also blend professional and publicly generated content. I've just finished working with Mikhail Glowacki, a large 3-year study, which examined more later, but examined 10 high technology clusters, 4 in North America and 6 in Europe, to look at how high technology firms, large, medium and small, aggregate, produce bricolage and murmurate and collaborate together to create different types of media to create a larger whole, and obviously incorporating AI and big data. So our Mikhail and my findings, which I'll present briefly later, suggest that public service media need a more fluid entrepreneurial structure, and they need to collaborate. So there's a change of structure and culture required. So yeah, next slide. So this is, I won't read this out, you can see, this is where the evidence comes from. It's solid evidence-based from funded studies, which are peer-reviewed. And maybe the slides will be sent around later, but you can, I've provided the links there so you can have a look at all of them. The first study is the one I've just referred to. Is my thesis, which I did before I left the BBC, when I was the social media editor, and the BBC was cutting its social media, and I argued that social media would be very important in the future and an essential part of media, but there are reasons why it was cut, and I'll touch on that later. So I did my thesis about it to present evidence on the changed relationship between the public and the public service broadcaster. This is a little bit BBC oriented, and for that I apologise. I know this is an international audience. Second one is I've just referred to, and also I've talked about the Youth Media and Culture Network. Okay, next slide. So let's go back to basics. The BBC was started by Lord Reith. Reithianism describes certain principles of broadcasting. This is to consider all viewpoints, probity, equality, diversity, universality, and a commitment to the public good, to public service. And he wanted to broadcast all that's very best in every department of human knowledge, endeavour and achievement. So he wanted to gather together the best brains and the best programming for the British nation in all its iterations and all its diversity. Next slide. So then in 1948, obviously media studies, media and communication studies was progressing, and also people were starting to examine what is broadcasting, what is communication. And Shannon and Weaver's model of communication is very well known. So it's a sort of sender-receiver model, but there are opportunities for feedback through, as we know, letters and phone-ins to broadcast programmes. But I know from when I was at the BBC, there was a sort of genre of programming called audience programmes. So audience programmes were thought of in a way as something different. And often it was the audience packaged as audience members watching a sort of theatrical event, which was then filmed, and there may be cutaways to audience reactions. Perhaps more instant was radio phone-ins, where the discussions could happen around topics of the day. But Paddy Scannell and his broadcast talk group analysed the power relations of radio programming, and often the person who speaks first holds the power and control of the whole programme, and that, of course, is the presenter. So and Nico Carpentier also looked at broadcast, that the power and control in broadcast programming, and often it's, well, mostly it's slanted for obvious sort of reasons of they're the people who are making sure the program goes the way it's supposed to. You know, that is the presenter has control. So then we move on to media and paratext. This is a literary term which basically talks about there is a main text and then there are subtexts. So that could be, if we translate that into broadcasting, that could be a website with a user interface, subtitles on a television program, or more widely, you know, David Attenborough's Blue Planet series, television, CD, book, T-shirt, and so on. But we're still drawn often, particularly older people, to the linear. Why is that? Something for the discussion. Okay, we'll move on to the next slide. So then Fisk, in his great book, Television Culture, refers to intertextuality as a sort of system of codes that the audience understands, which help us navigate around programming. So you've got the original, the primary text and subtext. So those may be, it may be, for example, a drama, conversations around the drama, references to the drama within media. And then there's a sort of a horizontal intertextuality, which is, could be historical or it could be contextual. So this is helpful. These are helpful ways to try and help us to think in a non-linear way about media. So the next slide. So back to young people and social media. Social media, great Ofcom report, one that's just come out actually, Ofcom's Nation report, One Nation report 2021. And, you know, social media is an integral part of teenagers' lives. 59% of UK children use social media. That's at age 11. But at the age of 15, 95% of children use it, young people use it. So, and, you know, they love Instagram more than Snapchat and Facebook, but they are embedded, you know, it's embedded in their lives. We know that YouTube, which arguably could be a sort of referred to as a broadcast medium, is very popular. TikTok's particularly popular among teenagers, with 30, you know, and TikTok's very good for making media, for producing media. So have a look at that. It's a very interesting report. So next slide. So the Youth Media and Culture Network, it's Charles Davis from Ryerson, Christine Itzhak-Hawes from the Applied University of Cologne, myself and other younger scholars. We're discovering that young people are best reached through their own story worlds, or story worlds that they know. So this could be conceptualized as branded media worlds with participatory elements. And this is, you know, one form of media which is strong now, and it's going to become even stronger as we go forward. Because we are humans, we are social, and we default to the social, and we think in the story. So we think in narratives naturally in our daily lives, in our everyday lives. So what did I just do? What am I going to do? And we're very social beings. It's become obvious in the pandemic that we default to the social. We've become very adapted to communicating online. Volker Grasmuck does wonderful work on public service media that I highly recommend. And he analysed the German public service media youth channel Funk, which we think is probably the most successful brand or multi-platform, multi-branded offering by public service media for this age group, 12 to 16, and wider and older as well. But young people are involved, so they are part of the machine that makes Funk. So we can have such media forms that they don't have to be commercial. They can simultaneously sustain the core values of public service media. And it's important that we retain young audiences, i.e., ergo, future audiences. So we've contributed to a recent consultation by Ofcom called Small Screen, Big Debate on the future of public service broadcasting in the UK. And we're very pleased that our study has been quoted and embedded in some of their interactions going forward. So people are listening. It's a good opportunity now to have this discussion. So next slide. So this is throwing this out for the discussion. Are we moving into a post-channel era? Or will channels remain part of the bricolage? And screens, large, medium and small, are still our way in often to media, unless we're at the V&A or something, some art gallery, or unless we're in the physical space ourselves, or doing VR, or in some kind of immersive environment. So we are fairly screen bound still, but that may not always be so. And I recommend, I went to see Nam June Pak's exhibition when it came to London. It was absolutely fantastic. I recommend it. See it if you can. Next slide. So this is coming into emerging forms of media. I'm in the Hi3 network, which is the big RDF project I'm working on. We're creating 3 sets of linked studios, one in Maidstone in Kent in the southeast of England, one in Folkestone, which is right on the coast in the southeast, and one at Canterbury Christchurch University, which is one of the oldest cities in the UK, again in the southeast. So we're creating studios for virtual production and to create bricolage, different types of media, which we will then we'll link all the studios together with a fast internet connection and data center and cloud production facilities to be able to work as one studio, because future emerging production processes are becoming so complex. And have a look at this. This is the pre-production, production, post-production processes for virtual production. Virtual production, I'll show you some pictures in a minute, draws together film, television, a little bit of television, multi-camera shoots are difficult, but film, television, and gaming using the Unreal gaming engine and also the Unity gaming engine, but mostly Unreal. And you can see there's more being done now in pre-production before the live action shoot. So what you can do is you can capture backgrounds, you can create backgrounds that you project, and then actors are in front. You film the actors with the backgrounds, which can be adjusted for camera parallax. So you don't know that they're not real. So this is not CGI, not VFX. This is on an LED wall, a background wall, projections on a background wall, and actors acting in front. Then once you've captured the story, you can augment it with post-production and visual effects, CGI, create a final edit and output to film, television, or even a game. But you can use the same assets again and again and again. So you could make a film which then you recut as a television program, and then you recut as a game or a CD or a t-shirt, you know, whatever you can output and remix it. So it's lower carbon and it's more effective, but you need teams of much wider group of production and creative staff than before. Next slide. So this is what they call the volume. A volume, this is from Novatech in Adelaide in Australia, and you can see there's an LED wall, and there are cameras. The LED wall it can be used as to light the subject, or it can be used to show a background which is generated by the Unreal Engine, gaming engine. And so the actors work in front, and also an actor could hold a beacon in his hand, a QR code, and an object could be projected onto the hand of the actor. So it's a bit like green screen, but this is the next generation. It's much, much more complex. Next slide. So the volume is the set, basically. And here you can see, so you can see there's a sort of sand set in front. There's the background, which is, it's not projected, it's generated by the LED screens. And then the actor acts in front. And you can make all the adjustments you want to live, working with the actors. So you can, and then in post-production, things can be stitched together. But this is all very new. I think there are 400 virtual production studios in the UK, very small. There's the National School of Film and Television are just about to do an undergraduate course in it for 3 years. But it's all very new. The terminology is being invented as we speak. Next slide. So here we have, again, you can have motion capture. That's a chap in a motion capture suit in front. So you can project onto or the computer can render a character on top of the actor, render his suit so he appears to be a bear or whatever. And the actor is acting in front of a background, which is also rendered. So the possibilities of what's real and what isn't real are endless. It's just absolutely phenomenal. And we've still have yet to work out a production grammar, and also an audience, you know, how the audience receive it, we still don't know. Next slide. So this is very significant for young people. This is from Ofcom, Adults Media Literacy Tracker. You can see very significant for virtual production. 43% of 16 to 24-year-olds use games consoles, and it's much larger than any other group. And can you see how much that has grown from 1% 65-year-olds plus, you know, and then 5% for 55 to 64-year-olds. But you look down to the left, this is really growing fast. So that indicates a sort of rapid adoption curve. Next slide. So this is back to my thesis, which looked at how the relationship with the audience changes once you add interactivity. And I argued and still argue that there is a return to the linear forms that everybody knows. So 1998 to 2004, the BBC experimented in social media. And this is the BBC's live chat studio at Bush House, which launched in 2003. But it very much is aping, wanting to be television, wanting to be radio, but mainly wanting to be television. So it was a place for experiments in old and new media. From the producer's perspective, it was from an executive perspective, it was the live chats weren't successful because we only got audiences of about 1,000 people for Simon Sharma and people like that. There were a few people celebrities, if you like, that attracted a lot of traffic, but for a broadcast organization, 1,000 people is peanuts. However, what wasn't taken into consideration was the long tail. So we posted up the live chat afterwards, which was accessed by many more people, and the social media created a buzz, because there weren't systems at that time to measure it, it was impossible to measure the aggregated audience. So it appeared to be 1,000, but it was much bigger than that. But the cost, it wasn't scalable from a cost perspective. It was expensive. Next slide. So here we have the press invited to see the new BBC studio at Bush House in the World Service, where the new media division was. So it created a lot of interest, and but you know, was it breaking new ground? No, because the technology wasn't ready. The internet wasn't fast enough to carry the pictures as the pictures and so there was a picture. There was a video and there was text interactions with the audience alongside the interview between the interviewer and interviewee, and they were out of sync. The text was scrolled up much faster than the video, which literally was, it was too heavy to be carried by the internet. Next slide. So here we have Greg Dyke, who was the Director General of the BBC at the time, and he was in the BBC studio. There's an interactive presenter there on the right, trained to do interactions with the public and to interview on camera. And it's a sort of pretty typical television interview type setup. But there was interest from, you know, the top. People were interested in this as an experiment. Next slide. So, and also it attracted lots of celebrities. Barbara Windsor there, who was one of the UK's biggest stars, an actress who was in EastEnders and one of the sort of best loved actresses of the day. And you can see there that the presenter on the right in a black dress interviewing Barbara Windsor, and the live chat at the top scrolling up with the question and answers from the public. So the presenter would ask questions and then the public would ask questions. And then it was streamed out of the window as well, of the studio, as well as going live. Next slide. So here we have the public outside where you saw the members of the press, and you could interact through the window and move one of the cameras and sort of put your question as well into the live chat event. So it was a bold experiment in trying new interactive television forms, but television was predominant rather than the participatory social media element, I would argue. Next slide. So there's a problem with participatory media. The social media was cut. And this is from my thesis. I argue that the BBC was letting the commercial providers take the risks it didn't wish to take. Because this is public money, it's one thing that inhibits a lot of the innovation that's possible because you have to have a public value test for anything large and new. However, undeniably, UK teenagers want this kind of thing. But also internally, the idea of losing editorial control was not popular with producers. They were used to being able to edit, and also they found it difficult to manage participatory environments. They didn't know how much control and how much freedom to offer audiences. Next slide. So going back to eudaimonia, to Reith, I think there's we've been at the Youth Media and Culture Network has been looking at eudaimonia. Eudaimonia is basically, Aristotle said, eudaimonia is any action which is for the public good, public well-being. And there's a group of psychologists who are looking at eudaimonia, and they're the positive psychology group. So they're looking at well-being, and we've been hooking up with them to look at public service media and well-being and psychological well-being. They say that well-being is not so much an outcome or an end state, it's a process of fulfilling or realizing one's true nature, fulfilling one's virtuous potentials and living as one was inherently intended to live. And Reith, that's what he was about. He was about providing radio. This is the sort of radio studio I worked in when I was a studio manager at the BBC in 1983. And on the radio producers would have music programs, but they would also publish dance steps in newspapers. This is during the Second World War mainly, but also before that, so that people could listen to the radio and dance with their partners or their friends, looking at the dance steps in the newspaper. So it's using media as a way of stimulating actions away from the radio or television for the greater good of all. And I think that's as true today as it always was. We're now looking for examples of eudaimonic media in this new bricolage paradigm. Next slide. So to finish, this is the big 3-year project, which was looking at the internal organizational culture of clusters of high technology firms, 4 in North America, 10 in Europe. The reason why we were looking at these clusters is to find good models to transport and to show to public service media organizations, ways of collaborating and ways of interacting with a wider constituency of creatives and producers, and also potentially the public themselves, and ways of producing new high technology media, forms of media and communication. So if we looked at these and then we have given our findings to public service media through a report which was distributed by the EBU. Thank you very much for doing that. Next slide. So here, these are the cities that we went to, and these are the public service media organizations. Some are large, some are medium, some are very small. But we went to the high technology clusters, looked at their internal culture by doing over 150 semi-structured interviews. We did walkabouts, city walkabouts, taking photographs of cafes and places where people meet. We looked at company reports, city strategies, news stories, and you can see the period there that we collect, over a 3-year data collection periods. And then we also did the same with the public nearest in proximity public service media, and compared the two, the organizational culture of each. Next slide. So what we discovered briefly is in public service media, and this is drawing on my thesis, the BBC departments were very territorial, and in the examples I gave you of the live chat studio, which sat in the new media division, they wanted to be seen as good as television. So there was people had, each department had their own key performance indicators, and that created a problem because people wouldn't collaborate, or it was less possible to collaborate with other departments because your performance and the financial structures and the reporting all went up to there's heads of different departments. There was not much horizontal management and leadership. Better now, much better now. But territoriality is a real issue. Also, we found in Gloakin Jackson, the high technology cluster study, there were a lot of support structures in high technology clusters, located mostly in co-working spaces, which large firms often had an interest in, but also small firms, and very agile contractual arrangements to do small, large, or medium type of work. It just was very, and the intellectual property was very well organized. So we didn't find the same structures in public service media, or many people whose sole job was to support collaborations of creatives within the aegis of the public service media, or within a partnership structure. Next slide. So basically the findings, what we found was high technology clusters, they're in very tight neighborhoods, city neighborhoods often, not always, which are technology oriented, but also goal oriented. Very much, they have a sense of the common good. They want to solve the problems of the world. They are very, in a sense, eudaimonic, public service oriented. They want to create new media services which solve the climate crisis or something like that. Versus the corporate headquarters of public service media, which are often situated in city centres, not always, sometimes in clusters, which is good, but are very corporate looking, like banks, and often without a sort of public producer place where people can collaborate or work together. That's changing. So what we saw also was entrepreneurialism was very much oriented towards high technology clusters, whereas in public service media, we found islands of innovation, sometimes an R&D department, but in the smaller public service media, perhaps just one or two people who were key innovators. So there's not a culture of, we found that it's not mutually exclusive. Eudaimonia and the public good it can coexist with being entrepreneurial. The high technology clusters were incredibly agile. Public service media was very rigid, much more rigid in its structures. In high technology clusters, there were very advanced pro-social workspaces, not so much in public service media. Communities of practice were in high evidence in high technology clusters, whatever they may be. There were lots of different clusters and communities of practice. Whereas in public service media, often the relationship was a partnership manager or an editor who commissions content. It's a completely different structure. So we found, in summary, aggregation in high technology clusters versus much more isolation in public service media. Next slide. So to conclude, bricolage, it's here, we know it is, but actually it's been here for quite some time. But media and communications are now a sort of remediating flow of assets that form and reform, and that's often due to multi-device delivery, separation from time dependency, and the blending of professional and user content. So this means that navigation is more problematic. And for young people, channels are becoming less relevant, but they do still like linear programming. They need to find it and consume it in new ways. AI and databases can assist the nuanced delivery of media to different audiences and devices, can do it automatically. But the organizational structure this is the big one. incoming production processes such as virtual production require collaboration, film, gaming, pre and post. So different aggregations of creatives have to happen. And the main issue seems to be the financial structures of public service media, which basically the finance is issued to a particular department, and the editorial policy, the referral upwards structures, most prevalent in journalism. If there's a problem, it's referred upwards. It's not referred across. So that is also a problem. All the communication narratives are upwards, and they're not really horizontal across the organization, or not so much. So it's much easier to default to linear content because that's what we know. Or those of us who are slightly older, that's what we tend to know. Partnership working, not so well supported. Staff need to be rewarded for interdepartmental and partnership working. PSM needs creative clustering. However that happens, it needs to happen. So thank you very much for listening, and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Lizzie, for a very interesting talk and lots of food for thought. I would now move straight to our two respondents. I see Madiana, so perhaps Madiana, you can start. Let me stop sharing the screen. So first we have Madiana and from EBU, and then Vilde from University of Oslo. Thank you.
Thank you, Alessandro, and thank you, Lizzie, for the interesting presentation and lots of insights, and indeed lots of food for thought. So where to start, with after so many insights and data, but I'll just boldly, with no real structure, I'll just start mentioning some of the things that came to my mind when I was listening to your presentation. One of them being particularly the fact that indeed young people think in terms of media universe, not TV, radio, not channels anymore. This is something that we definitely agree with that, and it's something that I'm particularly keen on when we're talking about public service media, because I'd go beyond. It's not that they think about media universes, they think about brands, and they then also adhere to the kind of content they like. But I think they think a lot about brands and the stories and the identities that are behind those brands beyond the media universe itself. So something that I like sharing, because it was a very positive discovery for me when we were doing some research for the EBU Youth Report, was that there is a traditional now, it's very common to see a debate among public service broadcasters on whether it is a good idea to use or reuse the mother brand of the public broadcaster to connect with young people, or if it's a better idea to completely separate your brand from the mother brand and create a completely new brand that's more appealing to young audiences. Because sometimes the mother brand represents dinosaur, traditional, unilateral, big kind of things, which are opposite to what young people adhere with. The fact is that this debate is there, and that there have been some public media organizations that have opted to go for their fully independent brand with nothing to do with the mother brand, while some others have decided to kind of decline the mother brand to make it a bit more young people appealing. And with some experience, then even those broadcasters who decided to create a separate brand, they realized that that was perhaps a mistake, because actually after some research they realized that some young people do like what public service media stand for. There are some comments from young people in different focus groups and so on that kind of point us to the fact that they don't necessarily always consume public service media because there's nothing relevant for them there. But when public service media do produce relevant content for them, then they actually love it. They actually like it because it's a brand of, it's a mark of, a stamp of quality, it's a stamp of something that actually is good for society. It's a stamp for many of the things that actually do move young people and drive young people. So I wanted to kind of also share this anecdote in terms of what in terms of brands and the fact that public service media brands are actually not as bad for young people when they actually do things right. And when I say do things right, I'll continue on this in a minute. Something clearly, I obviously was listening to you when you were talking about the fact that the organizational structure needs to change. We fully agree on that. COVID has kind of helped because COVID forced us to work differently in many levels. One of them being more of virtual tools, more of agility procedures, more of collaboration. So things have kind of improved. And particularly when it comes to production, there was a moment that everybody was in lockdown. Production was a huge challenge. It was impossible to produce physically. And that forced public service media to produce content, thinking perhaps less in terms of perfect standards and perfect quality standards, and being more flexible and more agile. And in the end, the content produced was as engaging for young people as it would have been if we'd had gone for a traditional pre-production, production, and post-production kind of product. So there are some learnings, but clearly that's the direction to go. Within the EBU, and this is beyond my own portfolio, but within the EBU, we have a whole initiative called Transformation, involving many people from different departments and different areas of expertise, where we're kind of accompanying and encouraging public service media to take their transformation processes much more seriously and to take action now. Also, when you were talking, Lizzie, about the social media, definitely. Well, we've talked a lot within the EBU atmosphere about the importance of public service media and non-linear content communication with young audiences. I actually think, and I really want to believe, I mean, based on at least the people we're really in contact with, I actually don't think there's one single person in the whole public service media environment that doesn't know or doesn't believe that social media is the direction to go. It's not even a question anymore. It was perhaps 10 years ago. I remember trying to encourage them to go for it. But hopefully today that conversation is not even there anymore. They know it. But for me, the question is, because they know it. I mean, and people working on young audiences within public service media know the importance of working on on social media and how to do this, what formats, what programs, what everything. We know the theory. The problem, I believe, is more related to top management, not necessarily investing properly in terms of budget and in terms of skills in what it takes to actually connect with young people. When we actually put the right resources, meaning money, and the right resources, meaning skills, then we do manage to connect with young people. So I think beyond the question about whether social media is the way to go or not, I think they all know it is, and they're all present on social media, but whether that's enough or the right way, that's the separate question. And that brings me to another thing that I was thinking while listening to your presentation. It's the challenge that we have with talent and also with hiring processes. We believe very much in what you said about, let young people do the content for young people. Let them actually take the floor at all levels of media publications. But we are, public organizations, and we have limitations in terms of recruitment, quite a lot, actually. It depends very much on the market and on each of the broadcasters, but there are hiring limitations. And so there are people who are there, who have been there for a long time, and there's no room for new talent or for young talent who would potentially help us to be more relevant in connecting with young people. But then also the war on talent. Let's be honest, there are still some very good, talented young professionals who believe in public service media and who long for working for public service media because of what we represent. But Google, YouTube, Netflix, all of them are indeed coming more and more prominently in Europe and hiring the best young talent as well. So it's literally the war on talent is, I would say, one of the key challenges that we have today. Beyond, knowing how to do it, yeah, we might know, but can we get those people in-house, or can we actually collaborate with them? That's perhaps where we're not getting there. You mentioned the success of Funk, which is definitely indeed one of our success stories. There are many others within public service media is only one of them. The EBU Youth Report, which is public, you can have a look at it, has the number of brands that we consider a success story when it comes to connecting with young people. And we also touch upon the elements that we think why those brands actually are succeeding. One of them, one of the most important ones being indeed let young people produce the content for young people, give them the floor in a way or another, whether that's hiring them or actually talk to them, let them guide the conversation about where your strategic direction should be going, what content do they like, what formats they like more, research, try to understand as much as possible the young people you want to connect with. And perhaps, well, 2 more points and then I head over. One was on I noted on the gamers, actually 16 to 24, 43% you mentioned from Ofcom of the 16 to 24-year-old use consoles or are game players. Obviously, I don't doubt this figure. On the contrary, I fully trust it. But there was something that we recently discovered that kind of blew my mind, which is the fact that, and this I'm talking about a European perspective, so it's not UK based, we discovered that both for esports and also for podcasts, both of them kind of trendy words when we're talking about connecting with young people, we discovered that they're actually not they're not flying. I mean, figures don't follow. Everybody talks about them as something that we should be investing in and innovate and explore. I'm not saying that we shouldn't. On the contrary, I'm always up for innovating, experimenting and trying, but the figures are not following, apparently. I cannot quote the figures now. It's actually from the most recent EBU's digital media consumption trends report. Both, as I said, for esports and for podcasts, we're not, they don't seem to be getting there when it comes to consumption by young people. The last point is related to what I was saying in terms of, we have to listen to young people, understand them, research, involve them, and so on in order to connect with them. But something that I'm always worried about, and it's something that in the EBU we're not getting there either, and public service media, I believe we're not getting there, it's to get to connecting with all young people. We keep talking to ourselves, the kind of public service media experts. We talk a lot to ourselves. Sometimes we try to talk to young people, but they're often students. They're often educated young people and kind of part of an elite. But how about all young people? Think about a young guy who's in the middle of the countryside in whatever country, in France, let's say, who doesn't have access to internet or who doesn't even want internet because his priorities in life are completely different, and he or she is so far away from the kind of conversations that we're having here that doesn't have an impact in his or her life at all. So I'm always kind of worried or concerned about this, and we're not getting there. I don't have the answer, but it's something that I would love to see how we can explore, like getting also to the young people who are not the ones that we always have in mind, but those who are completely away from the public service media, even from media, and we need to be there for them as well as public service broadcasters. Hopefully, hopefully it makes sense what I just said. I took lots of notes from your presentation, and these are just basically also some reflections for food for thought, not final answers, of course.
Thank you very much, Madiana, and I'm sure that Lizzie might like to answer some of your points, but what I suggest is that we now move to our next respondent, and then perhaps we give Lizzie the chance to address maybe not all, but some of the points. And I know there are also some questions in the chat box, and Maria is monitoring the chat box. So Vilde, I think you're next. Yeah, thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me to respond, and also thanks to Lizzie Jackson for raising such important questions, which is really about the future of public service television, as I think they are, and also relations to young audiences. And I also draw a lot of notes, and I will not return to all of them, but I think I'm going to concentrate on 3 key points. So the first point that I wanted to raise is related to young people, of course, and more precisely our common perceptions of young people and their media habits. So young people are often described as digital, global, social in their media consumption, and also involving that they are leaving national legacy media behind. So reading trade press or the newspaper or even scholarly debates, we often see that they are framed as escaping or missing or a problem or even a lost generation, which of course relates to what you also have said, that the media needs to re-engage or reconnect with them. And in our project on global teen culture, we have addressed this issue by launching the term global natives. And I know the term is really problematic, but we want to use it as an analytical lens to kind of discuss if young audiences should be seen as a new generation with settled or radical different entertainment media habits, and how the media and also policymakers respond to that. But of course, that perceptions of young people as innovative and forward-leaning and digital raise several vital questions, I think. And one of them is if young people's distinct media habits is the result of their specific generation or really the result of their life phase. And though that really depends what kind of actions the media should take. For seeing youth as a new generation, that would emphasize that young people have media habits that are completely different than older audience group, and they will continue to be different when they grew older, meaning also that the media industry needs to change for good. But if we instead see young people as driven by their distinct life phase, we could also see that they will kind of return by themselves when they enter a new life phase, when they get kids or when they move out or get a job or, get 40 or 30. So that question takes quite different, suggests quite different implications for the media industry. Secondly, related to young people, I also want to raise the question if young people really are that different and unique, or if we sometimes overrate their uniqueness or differentness, that we sometimes perceive them as more digital, more social, global, interactive, creative, and innovative than they really are, and that we become a little bit blind spotted by some young people and TikTok numbers and Snapchat numbers and YouTube numbers, and forget that a lot of young people also like to consume television at home, and perhaps one of Netflix's main advantage is that it advances people as audiences and not as producers or co-creators. So the second term or point that I wanted to raise relates to the importance of context and visibility, and also paratext that you, Jackson, also mentioned. And let me just admit or start that I absolutely love Jonathan Gray's book, Shows Sold Separately, where he uses paratext as a concept to analyze how promotion, buzz, and fan engagements connected to popular culture are used to impact audience expectations and reading strategies. And I've also used the term myself in the study of Norwegian popular teen television and found it incredibly helpful. However, also the issue of paratext and context raises different questions that I think that also needs to be discussed further, especially in terms of public service media. And firstly, is the issue, how can public service media gain visibility, attention, and buzz in a landscape of increased competition? And how can they increase, or how can public service media attract audiences and users through the web of digital, social, and global media when many public service media are not allowed to use third-party platforms or advised not to do so in order to strengthen them? So I think that's a real dilemma. How can you attract young audiences if you don't have them on your platforms when you're not supposed to use the platform where they are? So how should we kind of manage that dilemma? And secondly, also, how should public service institutions kind of take control of the many contexts and paratext surrounding their content and provide audiences with the right reading strategies, to use the term related to paratext? So while scheduled work does the perfect contextualization where public service broadcaster had control, how can they kind of take control in a new media landscape, providing audiences with the right expectations of what to come? And as you say, audiences will take a web of different pathways into the content, but how can we make sure that they get enough information about the content they are consuming before they do so. Not to go too long, but the third point and the last point I wanted to address was, of course, related to public service institutions themselves and how they respond to current change. And a common perspective in many scholarly debates seems to be that these institutions lack efficient strategies and practices and are in a profound crisis. And I find, however, that these institutions often are far more resilient and resourceful and innovative than what we sometimes ascribe them. And I also think that their long history provides the ability to change and adapt, and that they actually have a very essential function in our society. Otherwise, they would not have survived for so many years. And I know that I might be blindfolded by my position from a Nordic country, which probably holds the world's strongest and most popular public service broadcaster, the NRK. So, take for granted that I'm speaking out of my own context, but I nevertheless mean that these institutions and the way they are organized and financed and regulated still have an essential role to play in the future. And that does not mean that they shouldn't change and adapt, but also that they're quite capable of proving that their role precisely by adapting and responding to the current change. So that was my main point, but I'm really eager to follow the discussion for the rest of this time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vilde. So perhaps Lizzie, would you like to kind of offer a response to the two respondents? I'm sure, you can, pick and choose perhaps a few points from Madiana and from Vilde's response, and then I think there will be questions from the audience as well. So I will, Maria, correct me if I'm wrong, but we can keep the recording going until the point and when we give the floor to the audience. So please, Lizzie, yeah.
Okay, well, I'll pick up one or 2 points. I think the whether to have a separate brand for young people or to have content that's attractive for young people within the public service media brand is a really, really key discussion that we need to have going forward. I don't think we can pose any answers, at the moment, but I do think it's an important research question going forward. Vis-a-vis the problem being talent, public service media worldwide has always been, one of the functions has been to train up media professionals who then sometimes go to the commercial equivalents. But I think the training departments of public service media were always really, really important because it brought people into the organization, trained them up. Some of them stayed, some of them populated other commercial outlets and often came back again and to take management and then leadership, and then leave again and then come back to take leadership positions. So I think the symbiosis between public service media and the commercial media is, again, something James Bennett did some really useful work on that et al. I think 2010, but I think that could be reviewed. So moving on to Vilde, I think that the problem, if you like, you mentioned, are they a problem? No, they're not a problem. But the issue, she said, using a problem word again, is that young people mature at different stages and they are not the same, as you said. They are all at different stages of development. And there is a phase when boys and girls don't communicate or feel they want different things, and then they want to come massively together again. So I think this is something, again, that needs further unraveling. In my Adventure Rock study, which was looking at 9 to 10-year-olds and then 11 to 12-year-olds, they were completely different. They had different orientations to the world because the younger ones could do anything and social rules didn't apply, and physical rules, they could fly, they could do anything. but the older children had gone to middle school and behaved in a completely different way. They were school children, they were different. Lastly, I think the problem of third-party platforms, I know when I was at the BBC, there was BBC Jam, which failed. It had wonderful things in it, but the problem was that who owned the user accounts. So on third-party platforms, often the organization that owns the platforms keeps the user accounts. And that means the names, addresses or whatever details they hold. And that is a problem because that's often the way you communicate. You use those details to communicate with that particular audience. So I just throw that out as a potential big problem. And that could be the reason why third-party platforms are difficult.
Thank you very much, Lizzie. Maria, I think there are some questions from already in the chat box, and perhaps people would like to verbalize those questions. What I'll do now, I will stop the recording because we are entering the last part of our webinar. So we have up to 40 minutes, perhaps less. Let's see how the discussion goes. So I'll stop the recording now, and over to you, Maria.